Labor MP Clare O'Neil to discuss a few topics of the day. But firstly, Clare, let's discuss Anthony Albanese's vision statement. A very strong statement on climate change, which proved to be a bit of a weak spot for the Labor Party at the election.
Yeah, I mean, I think the speech that Anthony Albanese gave yesterday in Perth was absolutely brilliant, and it just gave me so much encouragement about the direction that Labor's going to take coming into this term of Parliament. We're called the Labor Party for a reason, and that's because our whole story of creation and our central purpose is about work. It's about jobs and making sure that every Australian who wants a job is able to get one, and then when they get a job, that they've got a decent job. And I think Albo talked about a lot of really important things yesterday, but one of the central things there was about what we need to do to make sure that more Australians are in decent work. And the fact that, you know, a lot of people would like to frame climate change as an issue that's a kind of dispute between the environment and work, and actually that's incorrect. We can tackle climate change and create many decent jobs for Australians. And I think he gave a brilliant speech yesterday.
Was that what you got wrong at the election with your messaging around climate change? Was it that Labor didn't address that, or was it just the fact it wasn't a costed policy?
Look, I think, Annalise, respect your question, but we're really looking forward now. This is about the next term of this upcoming Parliament, and Anthony Albanese is doing something, I think, very commendable, which is trying to set up a framework for us about what it is that Labor's going to focus on in this term of Parliament. We've got 2 million Australians at the moment who want to be in more work but aren't able to find it, and at the same time a very significant skills shortage that is holding our economy back. Now, here's a problem that government should be stepping in and solving.
To realise what you need to change. Surely you have to look at what you got wrong to realise what you need to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Respect your question, Annalise. But for us, this is really about the future, and it's making sure that this pivotal problem for 2 million people who want more jobs are able to see that a Labor government is going to be there for them, is going to help them, and is going to tackle this really pivotal issue for the community. And that's what Albo talked about yesterday.
So if we move on to this ACCC inquiry, this falls into your shadow portfolio about how we interact with these global media giants. Do you think that the government has a chance of being able to hold Google to account for storing our location information without our knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I think the government is completely at sea on these issues, and actually the incident you're referring to is really about the ACCC. It's about the regulator and the leadership that one of our regulators is taking on these issues. Probably a lot of Australians don't realise, but for 7 million of us who use Android phones, Google is tracking your location much of the time. And what the ACCC is alleging is that the way that permissions were being sought from consumers about how that data was being collected and used were not being clearly articulated. So obviously I'm not going to make a comment on this specific case. This is going to go through the court system, and I need to let the court system do its work. But I would say that I think this is one of a number of examples that is really going to explode for us in public policy around privacy, about how these big digital platforms are using our information and the extent to which we as consumers ought to have some control over our data.
When you say the government's at sea on this issue, what does that mean?
Well, it means that they've got nothing to say on this. You know, we've got a digital platforms inquiry that they haven't responded to, which has made a number of recommendations about privacy. But there's just no flourishing discussion on that side of politics about these very complex technology questions that are increasingly being talked about around people's kitchen tables. I haven't heard the government really say much about privacy at all for the last 7 years that they've been in power, yet this is becoming a really critical issue for a lot of Australians who I think are starting to realise that a lot of us have been using the internet for a long time. We've been on digital platforms for a long time. And we're now coming to realise that these digital providers are able to collect enormous amounts of very personal data about us, and we don't know what the data is. We have no control over it. We can't ask them to delete it, as you can in other jurisdictions. And there's no national framework for how we deal with these questions. I think this is a very big and emerging issue in politics that we need more people in Parliament to be talking about. I don't see any of that conversation happening on the other side.
Well, in defence of the government, didn't they start the inquiry into digital platforms?
Yeah, I mean, they asked the ACCC to do the inquiry, and I'm really impressed with the work that the ACCC has done, but they haven't responded to it. There hasn't been any policy response at all to what's come out of that, and instead there's been kind of a little bit of flapping around, nothing much more. I would like to see the government articulate a specific response to the many recommendations that are in the digital platforms inquiry, and we're really keen to engage in a discussion with them about how they want to move these issues forward.
And just finally, we've seen some consternation among the Nationals. Earlier this week, David Littleproud said that they're extending the farm household allowance indefinitely. It seems he spoke out of turn, that that's not actually the government's policy. Do you think the government and the Nationals are out of step on this?
I really do. And, you know, politics is one thing, but we're in the middle of the worst drought that we've ever experienced in Australian recorded history. There are literally thousands of people out there who are hemorrhaging money before they put their foot on the floor and do a day's work on their farm. And the government's just mired by squabbling and infighting. What we've said is that we need to have a national drought cabinet that includes all the political parties that are involved in this, so we don't end up with these petty arguments when farmers out there are really hurting. So this is just part of a long succession of pretty unpleasant episodes that I think farmers are having to watch on and wonder why the Nationals, who purport to be their representatives in federal parliament, are playing political games instead of looking after them.